It was a quiet Saturday evening when it happened. I had just gotten home from running some errands and was looking forward to relaxing for the rest of the night. As I walked up to my front door, nothing seemed out of the ordinary. I unlocked the door and stepped inside. The house was dark and silent. I flipped on the lights and set my bags down on the kitchen counter. That's when I first noticed it. A smell. It was faint but unmistakable. Cigarette smoke. My heart began to race. I don't smoke and neither does anyone else who lives with me. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up. I wasn't alone in the house. I slowly walked from room to room, searching for the source of the odor. The floors creaked under my feet. I strained my ears for any sound. Whoever was smoking had to still be inside. In the living room, the smell grew stronger. I turned the corner and there he was. A man, sitting on my couch, casually smoking a cigarette. Adrenaline coursed through my veins. How did he get in? What did he want? He looked over at me and smiled. "Hello there," he said in a friendly tone, as if this was totally normal, as if he belonged there. "What are you doing in my house?" I demanded, proud of how steady my voice sounded. "Just making myself comfortable," he replied, taking another puff of his cigarette. His relaxed demeanor made my skin crawl. He didn't look like a dangerous criminal, just an average middle-aged man. Except criminals don't usually sit smoking in strangers' living rooms. "You need to leave, now," I said sharply. He raised his eyebrows. "And why would I do that?" His tone was still light, almost amused. My mind was racing, trying to figure out the best way to get this psycho out of my house. I eyed the distance between us, wondering if I could make it to the door before he could grab me. "Because if you don't, I'm calling the police," I threatened. He sighed and stood up slowly. "Now let's not be hasty. I think you and I could have a mutually beneficial conversation." The implications behind his words made my stomach turn. I shook my head, hoping the fear didn't show on my face. "I don't know what kind of game you're playing, but you need to leave. This is my house. I don't know who you are or what you think gives you the right to break in, but I'm not interested in having any kind of conversation with you." For a second, his friendly facade flickered. His eyes flashed with anger. But then the pleasant smile returned. "Come on, be reasonable," he coaxed. "Don't you think we could be friends?" Friends? Is this guy delusional? There's no way I'm letting him get any closer to me. "I'll give you one last chance to get out before I call 911, I warned, reaching for my phone in my pocket. His face darkened. In one swift movement, he lurched toward me, knocking the phone out of my hand. I opened my mouth to scream, but no sound came out. He clamped one hand over my mouth and gripped my arm with the other. I thrashed against him, but he was too strong. "Shh," he whispered in my ear. "Don't fight. You'll only make this worse for yourself." Hot tears streamed down my cheeks as I struggled to break free. Why is this happening? What does he want from me? He dragged me toward the basement door, my heels digging into the floorboards. I twisted and turned, terror rising in my throat. Once he got me down there, I was trapped. At the top of the stairs, I went limp, letting my body fall to the floor. He lost his grip for just a second, and I seized the opportunity. I kicked and clawed and scrambled away from him. "Help!" I cried at the top of my lungs. "Somebody help me!" He grabbed my leg, his fingers digging into my skin. I kept screaming and fighting. Please God, let someone hear me. We crashed into the coffee table, shattering the glass top. I didn't even feel the shards slicing my hands and arms. Just when I thought my throat would give out, I heard the front door bang open. "Police! Don't move!" My attacker froze. The cavalry had arrived. Thank God my neighbor must have heard the struggle and called it in. Not that I had time to feel relieved. As the officers wrestled the intruder to the ground and cuffed him, the adrenaline drained from my body. My knees buckled and I sank to the floor. It was over. I was safe. But as I looked around my ruined living room, I realized nothing would ever be the same. My sanctuary had been violated. The police may have captured him, but he still took something from me. My peace of mind, my sense of security, gone. I survived the night, but the damage was done. He crept into the corners of my mind where he didn't belong. I tried to shut him out, to focus on repairing the broken windows and smashed furnishings. But it wasn't that simple. Weeks later, I still jumped at every odd sound. still checked and rechecked the locks. Sleep was elusive as I lay rigid in fear of the shadows. I knew he was behind bars, but I could still feel unseen trespassers invading the space around me. My therapist said PTSD is normal after experiencing a traumatic violation. I just needed to rebuild my feeling of safety, she said. But how do you rebuild something that's been shattered? How do you find sanctuary in a place that's already been breached? I wish I could say time healed the wounds, that eventually things went back to normal. But the truth is that Saturday evening left scars that will never fully fade. My home will never feel as safe. My mind will never feel as sound. For me, there is only before and after. Before, I took my security for granted. After, I will always be looking over my shoulder, keeping vigil for other intruders who wish to lay claim on what is mine. My sense of peace remains held hostage by the criminals who think they can crawl their way in. I survived, but I will never be the same. The house was dark when I pulled into the driveway. My husband's car wasn't there yet. He must be working late again. I gathered my things and headed to the front door, ready to be home after a long day. As soon as I stepped inside, I could tell something was off. The air felt different, stale, almost thick. I shrugged it off and went about my business, turning on lights as I moved through the house. In the kitchen, I noticed the back door was ajar. Odd. I thought I had locked it this morning. I shut it securely and did a quick scan of the rooms on the first floor. Nothing else seemed disturbed. I went upstairs to change and wash up before making some dinner. But when I walked into the bedroom, my heartbeat quickened. Drawers were opened, clothes strewn about. The debris of someone else going through our things. Rushing back downstairs, my mind was reeling. Was someone still here? Had they come back for more? I grabbed a bat from the closet and tentatively made my way through each room. Behind every door, I braced for some intruder to jump out. But the house appeared empty. Whoever broke in must have left in a hurry once they realized someone was home. Unless they were still hiding somewhere, watching me. The thought sent shivers down my spine. I couldn't stand being in the house another minute. I left in a rush and went to the nearby coffee shop to wait for my husband. Sipping a hot drink, jumping at every little sound, I kept replaying it in my head. The messy drawers, the open back door. Who would do this? And what were they looking for? The police came to inspect but found no signs of forced entry. They took a report but had little else to go on. We replaced the locks the next day, beefed up security, but it did little to ease my nerves. That night, back at home, I lay rigid in bed listening for any unusual creaks or clicks in the darkness. My husband's deep breathing beside me indicated he had somehow managed to fall asleep. Exhaustion must have taken over because I eventually drifted off too. I awoke sometime later to an odd noise. A shuffling, quiet but out of place. I shook my husband awake and whispered, "Did you hear that?" He mumbled it was nothing, but indulged me by getting up to search the house again. Like before, empty. The next week, my unease continued. I constantly felt watched, even with the shades down. At night, I tossed and turned, unable to quiet my racing mind. Then I started noticing odd things during the day. A glass moved from one counter to another, a rug slightly askew. Minor changes that hinted someone had been there while we were out. My husband said I was imagining things, overcome with paranoia after the break-in. But I knew. Someone had been in our home again. The presence felt sinister even if I couldn't see it. This went on for weeks. Phantom hands disturbing our things when we weren't looking, moving objects ever so slightly, keeping me on edge. My husband stopped believing me, but I knew what I knew. One night I resolved to stay awake, to finally catch the trespasser in the act. I chugged coffee and pinched myself, whatever it took to keep my eyes open. And then I saw it. A shadow passed outside the bedroom, subtle, but unmistakable. I gathered my courage and crept into the hallway. That's when I came face to face with the intruder. Though my mind struggled to make sense of what I saw, it was me, or some warped version of me. My physical twin, but emanating something intangibly malicious. Our eyes met in shock before this sinister clone vanished down the stairs. I wanted to believe it was just another sleep-deprived hallucination. But this was real. I had seen some dark manifestation of myself stalking my own home. I told my husband what had happened, pleading with him to believe me. It was only when he held me, genuinely concerned for my state of mind, that everything clicked into place. The break-in, the noises, the moved objects. It was all me. While asleep or blacked out, some twisted part of my psyche was invading my own space, sabotaging myself and those around me. My nocturnal fugue states had materialized into this noxious doppelganger. As terrifying as this malevolent entity felt, I now realized the only true threat was my own fractured mind. Still, I cannot erase the image of that nefarious double staring back at me in the shadows. She is a part of me, even if I want to deny it, and her presence cannot be locked out. I've never really been afraid to stay by myself before. Even as a kid, I loved having the house to myself when my parents went out of town. I could binge junk food, blast music, and stay up late watching scary movies. But all of that changed after the terrifying incident that happened last month when I was home alone. I don't know if I'll ever feel totally safe there by myself again. It started off like any normal Friday. My parents were going away overnight for a little weekend getaway trip. I'm 16 years old, mature enough to hold down the fort for a night. They left right after I got home from school, going over the house rules and emergency contacts one more time before hitting the road. I had big plans for my night of freedom. I ordered a pizza, popped some popcorn, and queued up a Netflix marathon of my favorite horror flicks. After the pizza arrived, I settled in on the couch to veg out. Outside, it was already pitch black at 6 on that cold autumn night. Wind lashed tree branches against the house and made the windows rattle. At around 10, during a lull between movies, I thought I heard a weird scraping sound outside. It was probably just raccoons bumping around the garbage cans, but it still gave me the creeps. I turned the volume down and listened closely. When it happened again, louder and closer to the house, my stomach tightened anxiously. I paused the movie and walked through the house, turning on all the lights. I peered out into the rainy darkness from every window but couldn't see anything except swaying trees. Still uneasy, I double-checked that all the doors and windows were locked up tight. Everything seemed secure, but I couldn't shake the twisted, nervous feeling in my gut. Settling back onto the couch, I turned the TV volume back up, pulled a blanket around me tightly, and tried to tell myself I was being ridiculous. But when the odd scraping sounded again, very clearly coming from the side of the house, a wave of panic surged through me. That was no raccoon. It was the distinct noise of something heavy, deliberately dragging across the wood siding. Over the howling wind, I could distinctly make out the scraping, followed by heavy, slow footsteps, thudding on the porch, moving closer to the doors. Gripped by terror, I grabbed my phone with shaking hands and dropped to the floor behind the couch, out of view from any windows. Whoever was out there, they were trying to get in. My whole body trembling uncontrollably, I called 911 and begged them to send help immediately. The dispatcher tried to calm me down and get details. I kept my voice low and strained, explaining breathlessly that someone was trying to break in and I was home alone. The scraping and footsteps continued outside, making my heart nearly explode in my chest. Then I heard the distinct jostling of the doorknob on the front door, accompanied by a loud bang against the wood. The intruder was trying to get in. I whimpered and stifled panicked sobs, praying police would arrive before the door gave way. But the person outside was persistent, forcibly testing every entrance. I listened in horror as they lurked around back, rattling doorknobs so hard I was afraid they would break. Then the scraping again on the side of the house, right against the living room windows. They knew I was inside alone. The dispatcher said units were on the way, but at least 10 minutes out. I nearly screamed when a fist pounded heavy blows on the window next to where I crouched, trembling on the floor, barely daring to breathe. Then the deafening shatter of glass. They had broken the window. Shards fell onto the carpet as a hand snaked through, unlatching the lock and pushing up hard on the bottom pane, forcing it open a few inches. I dropped the phone and ran sobbing down the dark hall to take shelter in my bedroom closet, clamping my mouth shut to stifle the sounds. I heard the intruder climb into the house through the smashed window, boots crunching over broken glass. Heavy footsteps crossed the floor, pausing right outside the living room. My whole body violently shook, terrified they were coming for me next. After an eternity of listening to them ransack the living room, I finally heard police sirens wailing in the distance. The heavy footsteps hurried back to the broken window, and a rush of cold air signaled their escape back into the night, just before police arrived. The officers searched the house and property, while I sat stunned in the back of a patrol car, but found no trace of the intruder. They deduced it was likely a deranged drug addict looking for valuables to steal and pawn based on the ransacked state of the living room. But nothing seemed to be taken. I begged my parents to come take me to a hotel when they got back, too afraid to stay in the house. They raced back in the middle of the night, faces pale with guilt and worry seeing the state I was in. I could tell they wondered if leaving me alone had been a mistake. In the weeks since, we've repaired the broken window, installed a security system, and trimmed the trees back from the sides of the house to eliminate blind spots. My parents are hesitant now anytime they need to go out at night or for long weekends, and I refuse to stay home without company after what happened. I still have nightmares imagining what would have happened if the intruder had found me cowering in that closet, utterly helpless.